set of presentations. This afternoon, my presentation will actually dwell on the state of the manufacturing industry. And then I will discuss to you the Manufacturing Resurgence Program, which is the priority program of the government running from 2014 to 2016. Okay. So first, we'll look at the manufacturing industry and the manufacturing sector in the Southeast Asia. We actually we actually monitor the performance of the manufacturing sector of the Philippines as well as how we fare in the ASEAN, because this is part of the work of the cluster. We have to monitor the performance so that we know whether we're doing good or we're making an impact in terms of the interventions we're doing. Okay. So, in Southeast Asia, this is actually based on the article that was done by ASEAN Briefing, and it actually shows that the Philippines is among those emerging manufacturing nations in ASEAN. We're actually together with Vietnam and Indonesia, and if we're going to compare the two groups, actually they were saying that in terms of technology, it is actually Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand that are leading. These are actually countries that tend to feature higher minimum wages and highly skilled workforces. In the second group naman, where the Philippines actually belong and is considered emerging, we have a need to develop and invest in education and infrastructure to avoid the specter of low value-added manufacturing, which is basically one of the major objectives of the Manufacturing Resurgence Program, and that is to go in the higher value-added segment of manufacturing. Both countries, or the sets of countries, actually have their own respective challenges. In Vietnam, this consists of mitigating the influence of state-owned enterprises. So, kumbaga, parang each of the countries would have their own challenges and then concerns as well in improving their manufacturing sector. And in Vietnam, it is also shoring up its now fragmented manufacturing sector, while in Indonesia, comprehensive upgrade of the national infrastructure is well overdue, just like in the Philippines. Thailand and Malaysia are considered to represent the middle of the pack, striking a fine balance between mid and high-tech manufacturing capabilities and competitive labor environments. Both countries, or sets of countries, have done remarkably well to situate themselves, with Malaysia slightly preferable if only for its lack of environmental and political risk, which actually Thailand has. Now, in terms of manufacturing value added, we're showing here actually that the Philippines grew faster than the world average in the ASEAN average, which is good. In fact, Philippines manufacturing sector grew 5.77. And if we're going to look at the world, which based on 208 countries, it grew only from 2010 to 2013 at 2.17, and ASEAN, the 10 countries, grew 4.27. So again, this is another indicator that the manufacturing sector is really moving up in the Philippines. In terms of employment, in terms of absolute numbers, we're actually third in terms of the number of employed in the manufacturing sector. First is Indonesia, next would be Thailand, and then third is the Philippines. But of course, this is relative to population. In terms of percentages relative to population, we're actually third. We're actually last. So, but in terms of absolute numbers, we're still third. In terms of export and import share naman, we're actually the third country with the highest export share, yung manufacturing sector natin, in 2012. The highest was Laos with the highest export share, followed by Cambodia and then the Philippines. But in terms of import share of manufacturing, this is for both products and services. In 2012, we're actually high compared to the other ASEAN countries. And then looking at internally, how our manufacturing sector is really doing, we looked at the performance of the first semester. So of course, in terms of industrial origin, services cannot be displaced naman. For several years, services has been getting the largest share of the three main sector. But if you're going to look at the share of manufacturing in the total industry, which is the second pie graph, it is accounting for 23.2 of the total GDP. When we went to the performance of the industry sector, manufacturing sector increased from 22.6 in the first semester to 22.9 in the second semester of 2013, and then 23.6 in the first semester of 2014. So basically, again, confirming that our manufacturing is growing. But in terms of employment, ito yung medyo sad part of it. And I think everybody is really clamoring for a better share of the manufacturing sector in terms of total employment. Manufacturing also only contributes 8.3%. So if you're going to look at the share of manufacturing to GDP, it's quite high. Pero pagdating sa employment, it's just 8%. So this is something that we're trying to remedy with the program. Again, just some of the, on the performance of the manufacturing sector. In terms of number of manufacturing establishments, there was a growth from the last survey that was done in 2010. It's 57% higher. So sabihin, mas marami tayong negosyo na tatanungan for the manufacturing sector. And then year on year, sabi nga natin, the GDP, the share of manufacturing sector GDP is also growing. And in terms of employment, the last count that we had, the official count is 3.1 million people employed, which is actually 1.2% higher than the number in 2012. Again, what are the sectors contributing to this growth of the manufacturing sector? So we look at these sectors. In terms of capacity utilization, the sectors that are really up in their operations or in their capacity utilization are really the petroleum products, so nasa petroleum refining, basic metals, non-metallic mineral products, machinery except electricals, food manufacturing, of course, electrical machinery, chemical products, paper and paper products, rubber and plastic products, publishing and printing, and then wood and wood products. In terms of the volume of production naman, which actually grew 13.3 compared to the June period of the survey last year. It grew 13.3, and then the contributing sectors naman are printing, leather products, fabricated metal products, machinery except electrical, furniture and fixtures, then basic metals, transport equipment, textiles, and food manufacturing. If you will look at the other indicators, value of production index, volume of net sales index, and value of net sales index, all increased, and basically the sectors contributing to the growth are almost the same. So they're just confirming each other na yung moving sectors natin are printing, the fabricated metal products, textiles, furniture, and fixtures. Now, incidentally, these are also some of the sectors that we're actually focusing on in terms of interventions by government programs and expecting a lot of job generation. Now, for the Manufacturing Resurgence Program, as mentioned earlier, this is one of those that is prioritized by government, and we have been given fund by the DPRM to implement the different programs under this. So first, of course, it is part of our mandate, and it has been included in the Philippine Development Plan update that was done for 2011 to 2016. So there we have identified as a challenge sa industry and services sector of the economy, there's really an untapped potential in the manufacturing sector. Because in fact, we're seeing the program was born because of NEDA's analysis that if we really want to generate a lot of jobs, we have to really revive the manufacturing sector because this is the sector that will really generate the jobs that the services sector cannot accommodate, particularly the low skilled. Because if you're looking only at IT BPM sector, of course they're hiring people who are highly skilled. So those that are the low skilled level of the labor pool, these are the jobs that we want to find in general. Okay? So I mentioned this earlier, there's a lower share of manufacturing to total GDP compared to similarly situated ASEAN countries. Exports are still concentrated in a few products and markets. In fact, if we're going to look at our export structure, it has been electronics that has been getting the biggest share. I think electronics started with 70% in the mid-2000, and then now it's down to 40%. And there has to be a diversification that should happen, because if one sector is down and the other major markets are down as well, then what happens to our manufacturing sector? So we have to diversify, and that's part of the strategy. Low employment to growth elasticity, skills mismatch. This has been one of those that has been mentioned always in a forum or when we talk with the private sector. Low labor absorptive capacity, because basically it's just 8% of total employment, and then low value addition in the MSME sector. And that is also one of those considerations in the strategies under the manufacturing industry. Now, the mandate for DTI, or for all the agencies concerned or included as participating agencies in the resurgence program, is really to pursue industrial policy that promotes sectors such as iron and steel, petrochemicals, copper, and other sectors that we had potential to grow because we have the strength before. So sample of this are apparel or garments, footwear, motor vehicles and parts, and others. We're also doing and formulating what we call the Comprehensive National Industrial Strategy with the assistance of the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS. And the intention really is, while we have the manufacturing industry roadmap, it has to align, it has to be coordinated also on how we want to grow the agriculture sector as well as the services sector. They have to be mutually supportive with one another if we want to grow the whole economy and to generate the jobs that we want to generate. Now again, there's the implementation of the manufacturing resurgence roadmap, and more importantly also is the provision of the basic infrastructure support, the science, technology, and innovation services, as well as the business development services. Now, this is now the general program of what we implement in the Department of Trade and Industry, or the Board of Investments. Basically, the whole program, we call it Industry Development Program. And our coverage is industry, manufacturing, services. The agriculture part of it is with the Department of Agriculture, because we always want to stress this one, because we've been always asked in a lot of forums why we're not tackling agriculture production or commercial production, why we're not handling coffee, we're not handling coconut. It's because the processing side is with agriculture, the processing side is with the Department of Trade and Industry. Okay, so just not to overlap with the other agencies' mandates. Now, we have two major programs. That's basically Industry Road Mapping Project, and the coverage is actually industry and manufacturing services. The second one is the Manufacturing Resurgence Program. The MRP, what we call the Manufacturing Resurgence Program, you can actually call it an act of the IDP, or the Industry Road Mapping Project, because we started only with the roadmap of the manufacturing industry. But as it turned out, when the 2014 budget was enacted, we had a special program called Manufacturing Resurgence Program. So since it became a very big program for the government, we had to spin it off from the original project of the DPRM, which is the road mapping. So meron na siyang life of its own, meron din siyang sariling working group or cluster that implements the program. For the Industry Road Mapping Project, currently we have 30 roadmaps with us. And each of the roadmaps na yun actually have what we call the sectoral working groups who implement the roadmaps. So we want to stress that we actually implement the roadmaps that were submitted to us. Because some of the questions that we always get is, so the roadmap is done, what happens next? And what happens beyond 2016? What happens in 2016 is that we have institutionalized the mechanism to implement the roadmaps, and therefore the work would continue. The working groups will continue to perform and implement the roadmaps side by side with the private sector, particularly the private sector or the organization who work and author the sectoral roadmap. Okay, and submitted it to people. Now, in addition to the 30 roadmaps, we're still expecting 21 more either late 2014 or early 2015. So we're looking at around 50 roadmaps that BOI will actually implement. And then, just to show the connection, these sectoral roadmaps, particularly those manufacturing sectors, actually the different interventions or the different activities being undertaken by the sectoral roadmaps feed into the manufacturing resurgence program. So it's not as if they're totally independent of one another, but the IRP, the sectoral initiatives feed into the manufacturing resurgence program. And you have dedicated groups to actually oversee the different activities and concerns of each of the sector. Now, for the manufacturing resurgence program, we have listed here actually the legal issuance for that. That's the NBM 118 of the DPM. In fact, they have given us around 239 billion for the program. And it's scattered among different agencies. The participating agencies include DOLE, which is actually the co-chair of the program, DOST, particularly the PSHED, TESDA, SHED, DOE, NPC, NEA, National Electrification Administration, DA, and the PCA. So really the intention of DBM when they identified all of us in the participating agencies for the cluster is really to work together from the R&D, from the commercial production to the processing, and then even to the training or human development of the different sectors. And then of course, we do a lot of advocacy or information campaign because of course we want to have a buy-in of all the stakeholders in the implementation of the programs. So one of the main platforms that we have, and I hope some of you get to attend some of the updates that we do, is yung first trade and industry development updates. And the first one is actually was done featuring the manufacturing sector that was done in August of 2015. So since then, we've been holding distinct updates in the BOI featuring different sectors of the economy as they submit the roadmaps to us. So again, this is the MRP. And the main reference that we're using in implementing the program is the manufacturing industry roadmap that was also crafted by PIDS. The MIR, as we call it, is actually a consolidation of all the sectoral roadmaps that were submitted to us. So what PIDS did was really look at all the sectoral roadmaps, conduct brown bag sessions with all stakeholders, consolidate them, and make it into a manufacturing industry roadmap. So this is quite comprehensive in terms of consultations and in terms of assessment. So what are the strategies that were identified in the MIR? So basically, the vision for the manufacturing industry really is to have globally competitive manufacturing industry or sector. And the way we're going to achieve this vision is in 3 phases. So it's actually, by the short run, we have 2014 to 2017. The goal there is to rebuild the capacities of existing industries, strengthen emerging industries, maintain competitiveness of comparative advantage industries. When we started with the road mapping project of the BOI, a lot of our basic industries have very low capacity utilization. For example, the iron and steel, they were just at 40% capacity utilization. The other sectors also were reporting such. So we were thinking then at the first phase of the implementation, maybe it is good for us to really build the capacities or increase capacity utilization rather than inviting new players which would actually just probably produce glut in the market. So that was the idea. But the second run, which is 2017 to 2021, we said we have to shift to high value-added activities, investments in upstream industries, link and integrate industries, SMEs, and large enterprises. But it doesn't mean that we have to wait for 2017 to do the value adding. This can be done simultaneous also with the first phase for those industries that are ready to do high value adding. And this is where a lot of collaboration with the UST actually is needed and is actually happening. And if you will notice in the medium run, the intention really is not just to lead industries vertically, but also to try to have the SMEs join the supply chain. So this is what Dr. Shelhavito was saying, democratizing the supply chain, really allowing more of the SMEs to join the supply chain, develop themselves, grow them bigger, and hopefully we will generate more jobs for them, for the sector. In the long run, which is 2021 to 2025, is really participate as hubs in regional and global production networks, particularly for the sectors who are very active in the global value chains, automotive, electronics, machinery, garments, and food sector. Now, in terms of strategic actions, this is how we're looking at it. Of course, there are going to be horizontal issues. There will be common concerns. There will be common issues among all sectors. And that would include, for example, investment promotion. They would want investments to come into their sectors to complete their supply chain. Of course, they're clamoring for a reduced cost in power. If not cost, it is the stability of the supply of power. Of course, there's also a lot of smuggling in some of the sectors, logistics and infrastructure. And of course, for those that are export-oriented industries, they would want us also to look at a competitive exchange rate. We're not saying we should have high exchange rate or low exchange rate, because both sides of the economy would be affected, both the domestic and the export-oriented. So what we're saying is have a competitive exchange rate. Okay? And then in terms of vertical measures, because this would be concerns only to a specific sector, one or two sectors, and we call them vertical measures. And that would be to close the supply chain gaps, expand domestic market and exports. Of course, very important, HRD and skills, SME development, technology upgrading, innovation, and common facilities. So the assumption here is we will be having 7 to 8% GDP growth rate, and that at the end of the 2025 period of the MIR, we'll have around 30% value added from the manufacturing sector, and it will account for 15% of total employment. Okay. And then more importantly also is that we will have a lot of coordination mechanism between and among government agencies, because we have to do a lot of synergistic activities here to get more from the budget that the DPRM is giving us. Now, just to show you how we're also using the investment priorities plan of the BOI in growing the manufacturing sector, we have actually included here several manufacturing sectors like motor vehicles, shipbuilding and parts, including parts and components, aerospace parts and components, chemicals, paper, copper wires and copper wire rods, iron and steel, tool and die. We forgot to include here, of course, more important also is the food processing sector, as well as those manufactured goods that are actually exported out of the country or into the economy. Just to show you, this is how we're working in government. We have a coordination mechanism. The Cabinet Assistance System is in Malacanang. This is headed by Secretary Almendras. And of course, we have the Industry Development Council. This is led by Secretary Domingo. And all the members are actually secretaries of the different relevant government agencies. And this is how we're actually looking at the coordination from the sectoral working groups. It goes up to the Industry Development Council, and the council is supposed to report to the President the outcome of our performance, how it affected the manufacturing sector in the Philippines, and if ever there are government agencies not cooperating under the program, that would be part of the report. Now, I've said 30 roadmaps. This is just to show you the list, but I will not go through them. This is the ones that are in progress. And these were the peak updates that were done already. The next peak updates will happen on October 17, featuring the auto sector. And that will have a focus on jobs generation as well for the auto sector. So, I've mentioned, these are just the summary of what we're doing in the sectoral work. Skip some of the slides because my time is going to bump on in. I'm not going to go through also this 7 successive slides, this is actually just to show you that there are specific projects of the different government agency under the NRP, and they're actually distributed. The projects and programs are distributed nationwide, so they're not being done or concentrated in NCR. In fact, the mandate of the DPRM is to go to the areas where they have geographical focus, meaning particularly those areas where there's low employment and therefore jobs have to be generated, or there's high poverty in cities. So the action plan really includes closing supply value chain gaps, so different projects, expanding the domestic market for our local industries, human resource development and skills training, so even DOST is contributing in this segment of the action plan. SME development, aside from DOST, for example, doing their set of projects, the BPI is also giving equipment to the SMEs as part of our shared services facility, and the intention really is to increase productivity or improve the product quality of our MSMEs. Innovation and then other key support measures. A lot of our industries right now are clamoring for financial support in terms of doing some road mapping on their own, particularly the small sectors, and also a lot of pre-feasibility studies for some segments of their industries. And then a lot of testing facilities, a lot of support infrastructure for all of our industries. So, yun lang. And in terms of energy, power, there's also a lot of projects being undertaken by DOE, NEA, and NPC. So all of these are actually in the areas where DBM wants us to do. I think that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.